We have all definitely been in that highly specific, highly vulnerable
Oh,
situation.
absolutely.
You know, you or someone you love gets a piece of confusing medical news, or perhaps you're just trying to figure out why a certain medication is like creating this totally unexpected side effect.
Right, something completely out of left field.
Exactly. So you open up a web browser, the blue light of the screen hits your face, and you type your question into a search engine. And in a fraction of a second, you were just hit with this massive, unfiltered tidal wave.
To millions of results,
Millions. And you have forums filled with these terrifying, totally out of context anecdotes,
which is the
the
worst.
absolute worst. And then you have these heavily sponsored articles from pharmaceutical companies that are, masked as objective research.
Yeah, that line gets very blurry.
It really does. And then on the other extreme, you have dense, peer-reviewed academic papers locked behind paywalls.
Written in complete clinical jargon.
Right. Jargon that basically requires a medical degree just to parse. I mean, it is the absolute definition of information overload. And for anyone navigating the healthcare system, it's just an incredibly isolating experience.
It is deeply isolating.
Yeah.
And, paradoxically, having access to an infinite amount of data often leads to a profound lack of actual understanding.
Because you can't filter it.
Exactly. Instead of feeling empowered, the user usually ends up feeling significantly more anxious. I mean, you start out looking for a simple, concrete answer to a baseline question, and you end up falling down this labyrinthine rabbit hole of, like, worst-case scenarios and conflicting advice.
Yeah, suddenly you have 3 different rare diseases according to the internet.
Right. And this phenomenon, it fundamentally breaks down the utility of the internet as a tool for patient advocacy.
Which is the exact problem we are tackling in this deep dive today. We are exploring a really fascinating source provided to us. It's an iMedix brief titled Deciphering the Cellular Complexities of Leukemia.
It's a great document.
It really is. And the stated mission of this brief is to answer a remarkably fundamental question, which is, what is leukemia cancer? But alongside an analysis of that specific document, we're also examining the foundational materials of the iMedix platform itself.
Right, because the context of where you get the information matters just as much as the info itself.
Exactly. We want to understand how a dedicated independent medical information platform approaches the overarching concepts of medication safety and, patient education. The goal is to see how platforms like this attempt to cut through all that terrifying late-night noise to provide actual clarity.
And that underlying mission is, it's critical to analyze. Answering a question like, what is leukemia cancer? On a platform designed for patients, well, it's not just handing someone a dictionary definition.
No, I wouldn't help anyone.
Or a stark list of symptoms. It's an exercise in translation. It requires taking incredibly complex microscopic biology and converting it into something actionable and, comprehensible.
Making it real for the person reading it.
Exactly. It's about empowering patients to actually understand the foundational building blocks of their own health, rather than just leaving them as passive recipients of a clinical diagnosis.
I have to say, the specific phrasing chosen for the title of this brief, Cellular Complexities, it immediately shifts the perspective of the reader.
It really does.
Right. It moves the conversation away from the abstract terror of a diagnosis and frames the human body as this highly intricate, almost mysterious machine.
A machine that can be understood.
Exactly. It suggests a system operating on a microscopic level that simply needs the right translator to explain how all the gears and cogs fit together. I mean, I think it fundamentally changes the relationship the reader has with the disease.
That framing is highly intentional. And, for you listening right now, whether you are actively navigating a new diagnosis or maybe you're doing targeted research to advocate for a family member.
Which so many people do.
They really do. Or whether you are simply an intensely curious learner who wants to understand the mechanics of human biology. Having access to clear, unbiased medical information is, well, it's a modern necessity.
100%.
It is the absolute prerequisite for any meaningful agency in the modern healthcare system.
So let's start by analyzing the specific ecosystem where this brief lives. Our sources indicate that iMedix operates primarily as an independent medical information platform, right?
Correct.
With a dedication to exploring medication safety, untangling complex treatment questions, and providing comprehensive patient education. But I really want to scrutinize that word, independence.
It's a loaded word.
It is, because,
Yeah.
everyone claims to be independent online. In the modern healthcare landscape, and specifically within the digital health space, what does independent actually look like mechanically?
Well, it is Arguably the most scrutinized word in their entire mission statement. And for good reason. Because to understand why structural independence matters, we first have to dissect how medical information is typically distributed online today.
Okay, lay it out for us.
The internet is, at its core, a commercial marketplace. The vast majority of the health information a user encounters is inextricably linked to commercial interests,
Sure.
and often in ways that are, deliberately obfuscated.
Hidden in the fine print.
Exactly. You have large informational platforms that are subsidized by pharmaceutical marketing.
Yeah.
You have search algorithms designed to maximize user engagement.
Which inherently means prioritizing the most sensational stuff, right?
Right. The emotionally resonant or flat-out terrifying medical content, simply because fear drives click-through rates.
But I struggle with the idea that any platform can be entirely immune to that ecosystem. I mean, even if a platform isn't directly funded by a pharmaceutical company, aren't they still somewhat captive to the algorithms that dictate how patients find them in the first place?
That's a fair point.
Because if they don't play the engagement game, they just vanish into digital obscurity.
You are identifying the central tension of digital publishing right there. It is true that visibility requires playing some part in the algorithmic ecosystem. However, the distinction lies in the foundational monetization strategy and the editorial firewall.
The firewall.
Yeah. When a platform is built subtly to funnel a user towards, say, a specific telehealth service or a proprietary diagnostic tool or a branded medication, the actual content becomes compromised.
Because they need you to buy the thing.
Precisely. An independent platform, by contrast, operates outside of that specific transactional funnel. It positions itself as a neutral arbiter of clinical data.
So what's their product then?
Its primary metric for success, its product essentially is patient education itself, rather than a secondary commercial outcome. The editorial priority remains an objective, comprehensive look at the available data.
Okay, let's unpack this using an analogy from a different sector entirely. Let's think about the financial sector. If you seek out a financial advisor and you discover their compensation structure dictates they only receive a commission if you purchase one highly volatile, specific technology stock.
Right. You'd run for the hills.
You would, because their advice regarding your long-term retirement plan is inherently compromised. Their guidance is inextricably linked to their paycheck.
Exactly.
However, a fiduciary, an independent advisor who is legally and structurally bound to act exclusively in your best financial interests, well, they provide a vastly different service.
A completely different baseline of trust.
Right. And when it comes to healthcare information, which carries infinitely higher stakes than a retirement portfolio, patients require the equivalent of a medical fiduciary.
I love that term, medical fiduciary.
Yeah. They need a platform that presents the entire unvarnished picture of their treatment options without a hidden structural agenda.
That analogy perfectly captures the dynamic. Because a patient requires a resource that will clearly outline the statistical benefits of a treatment protocol, but will also rigorously and crucially, prominently detail the side effects and contraindications.
Without burying them in an endless scroll.
Right, without utilizing editorial sleight of hand to downplay them. And if we extrapolate this concept further, we have to consider the broader societal impact of robust, independent patient education.
How so?
Well, historically, the doctor-patient relationship has been characterized by a profound asymmetry of information. The physician held all the data, all the specialized knowledge, and the diagnostic power.
And the patient was largely expected to just be a passive recipient of whatever treatment protocol was prescribed.
The classic era of medical paternalism, where the patient simply accepted the prescription slip without having the vocabulary to question the methodology.
Yeah, doctor knows best. No questions asked.
Precisely. But when patients are armed with unbiased, highly accurate, and accessible information before they even enter the clinical environment, that entire power dynamic shifts fundamentally.
It levels the playing field.
It does. It ceases to be a top-down directive and becomes a collaborative enterprise. A patient can enter a consultation and state, "I understand the mechanics of my diagnosis. I've reviewed these 3 potential interventions, and I have specific data-driven questions regarding the long-term safety profile of this particular compound."
Which is amazing.
It represents a vastly superior, much more rigorous model of healthcare delivery.
I hear what you're saying, but let me push back on the reality of implementing this.
Sure.
In a digital landscape where literally anyone with a keyboard and a sophisticated website can present themselves as an authoritative health guru.
And many do.
Many do. So how does a genuinely independent platform establish that crucial baseline of trust? We are talking about users who have often just received a terrifying diagnosis. They are in a highly vulnerable, cognitively overwhelmed state.
They're panicking.
Exactly. So how does a platform prove, mechanically, that they are the fiduciary and not just another sophisticated salesperson?
It's a great question. Trust in this context cannot be manufactured through clever marketing or reassuring user interfaces. It is built through demonstrated competence, rigorous transparency, and, honestly, editorial courage.
Courage.
Yes. One of the primary indicators of an independent platform's integrity is its refusal to shy away from immense complexity. They do not provide watered-down, patronizing summaries that insult the intelligence of the reader.
They don't treat the patient like a child.
Exactly. They tackle the most intimidating, multi-layered subjects head-on, delivering the analysis with absolute clarity. They assume the reader is capable of understanding advanced concepts if those concepts are translated effectively.
Which logically transitions us directly into the methodology used in the specific medical brief provided in our sources today.
It's the perfect example.
Let's dive deep into that brief. So the document is titled Deciphering the Cellular Complexities of Leukemia, and its core objective is to explore the seemingly simple question, what is leukemia cancer?
Notice how the framing immediately sets the parameters. They do not simply ask, what is leukemia, and list the symptoms. They anchor the entire exploration around cellular complexities.
Which we mentioned earlier.
Right. And this is a vital methodological choice because when the general public thinks of an illness, they typically visualize it on a macro anatomical level.
Like a respiratory infection implies inflamed lungs.
Right. A fracture is a broken bone. Even within the realm of oncology, the default mental model for cancer is a solid tumor.
A localized mass.
Yes, a mass of tissue that can be identified on an imaging scan and conceptually isolated from the rest of the body.
Right, it's something tangible. The mental model is an invader occupying a specific space, something a surgical team can theoretically excise and remove from the system entirely.
But to comprehend leukemia, the brief requires the reader to completely abandon that macro-localized mindset. Answering what is leukemia cancer forces an examination at the microscopic systemic level.
You have to zoom way, way in.
Exactly. It requires deciphering a biological failure. Leukemia is not a localized mass. It is a pathology fundamentally rooted in the complex, aberrant behavior of the body's own cells.
Specifically within the blood and bone marrow, right?
Yes, proliferating within the systemic fluid environments of the body.
You know, I am fascinated by the psychological implications of using language like deciphering and cellular complexities in patient-facing literature.
How so?
Well, the word cancer alone typically induces a state of cognitive paralysis. It is culturally coded as chaotic, unpredictable, and entirely uncontrollable.
A death sentence in many minds.
Exactly. However, framing the disease as a complexity that requires deciphering changes the cognitive genre of the problem. It shifts the paradigm from a mystical curse to a highly intricate engineering problem within the biological system.
I like that. An engineering problem.
Yeah, it suggests that while the pathology is incredibly complex, it is ultimately governed by rules that scientific inquiry can decode and dismantle. I suspect that linguistic shift actively reduces the sheer, paralyzing terror of the diagnosis.
It absolutely reframes the patient's role. They transition from a helpless victim of an arbitrary disease to an active student of a specific biological process. And to effectively teach this biological process, the brief must meticulously differentiate blood cancers from the solid tumors we just discussed.
Right.
This is where the translation of complexity becomes paramount.
Here is where it gets really interesting. To visualize this differentiation, let's step away from clinical terminology for a moment and look at the body as a sprawling, highly integrated metropolitan infrastructure.
Okay, a city. Let's build it.
In this scenario, a solid tumor, like a carcinoma in the lung or breast, is akin to an unauthorized, rapidly expanding structure being built in one specific localized neighborhood.
Right, an illegal skyscraper.
Exactly. It consumes local resources, disrupts the immediate area, and structurally damages the adjacent buildings. The clinical intervention is essentially a targeted demolition crew tasked with bringing that specific structure down.
Makes perfect sense.
Leukemia, however, is a systemic failure of the workforce itself. It occurs when a highly specialized segment of the city's infrastructure, the transportation network, and the emergency response teams suffers a catastrophic protocol failure.
They go rogue.
They stop performing their assigned duties, they begin cloning themselves uncontrollably, and flood every arterial highway in the entire metropolis, gridlocking the entire system.
That analogy translates the systemic nature of the disease perfectly,
Yeah.
because the arterial highways in this scenario are the human cardiovascular and lymphatic systems, and the workforce are the blood cells.
So where does this rogue workforce come from?
Well, to decipher the origin of this complexity, the iMedix brief directs the reader to the site of production, the bone marrow.
The actual manufacturing center, located in the spongy tissue inside the larger bones.
Yes, the bone marrow serves as the primary hematopoietic center of the body. And within this marrow exist remarkably versatile entities known as hematopoietic stem cells.
Stem cells. We hear that term a lot.
Right. These are undifferentiated foundational cells. They are the blank slates. In a healthy biological system, these stem cells undergo a highly regulated process of differentiation and maturation.
Meaning they grow up and get specific jobs.
Exactly. They develop into three primary lineages of functional cells, depending on the immediate systemic needs of the body.
Okay, let's catalog the specific outputs of this manufacturing center because, understanding the normal baseline is required to understand the pathology.
Okay, first, the marrow produces erythrocytes, or red blood cells.
The delivery trucks.
Yes, these are the logistical carriers. They are responsible for transporting oxygen from the pulmonary system, your lungs, to every single cellular tissue in the body.
So without them, the city suffocates.
Exactly. Second, it produces thrombocytes, or platelets. These function as the immediate triage and repair crew.
The maintenance team.
Right. They are essential for hemostasis. They clump together to form clots and prevent catastrophic hemorrhage when vascular integrity is breached.
So when you get a cut, they patch the road.
Exactly. Finally, the marrow produces leukocytes, or white blood cells. And this represents the body's entire immunological defense infrastructure.
The police and military.
Exactly. It encompasses both innate, immediate responders, the beat cops, and highly specialized adaptive units that target specific pathogens, like the special forces.
So assuming optimal conditions, this manufacturing center operates with flawless precision.
And perfect factory.
A stem cell differentiates, receives its specific functional assignment, enters the systemic circulation, performs its required duties for a predetermined lifespan, and then undergoes apoptosis.
Which is programmed, highly regulated cellular death.
Right. It retires. The marrow then simply calibrates production to replace the exact number of cells lost. It is an exquisitely balanced supply and demand economy.
It's beautiful when it works. But leukemia represents the catastrophic breakdown of that specific regulatory economy.
Where does it go wrong?
The disease originates when a single stem cell within the marrow undergoes an acquired genetic mutation. The fundamental operating code of the cell is corrupted.
Just one cell.
It starts with just one. As a direct consequence of this mutation, the cell loses the capacity to mature into a functional red blood cell, platelet, or white blood cell. Instead, it becomes arrested in an entirely immature, non-functional state.
So it's stuck as a trainee. It never actually learns how to do a job.
Precisely.
Yeah.
These abnormal arrested cells are clinically referred to as blasts. And the most devastating aspect of this specific cellular complexity is not merely their lack of function, but their immortality.
Wait, immortality?
Yes. They actively evade the systemic signals that trigger apoptosis.
They refuse to die, and they retain the stem cell's capacity for rapid division.
Endlessly.
Yeah.
And aggressively. Consequently, the bone marrow, the confined physical space of the manufacturing center, becomes exponentially overrun with billions of these non-functional blast cells.
Oh, wow.
They physically and metabolically crowd out the remaining healthy stem cells. Returning to your metropolitan analogy, it is the equivalent of filling the factory floor with millions of broken, useless machines, preventing the actual workers from accessing the assembly lines.
So nothing good is being produced.
Right. Because of this profound crowding, the marrow simply ceases to produce adequate volumes of healthy red blood cells, platelets, and functional white blood cells.
I think this is a crucial conceptual breakthrough for a patient deciphering their condition. The immediate and severe symptoms of leukemia are not primarily caused by the cancer cells actively attacking healthy tissue like a virus might.
Right, they aren't eating the city.
No. The symptoms are the direct physiological consequence of the systemic deficit. The entire city is shutting down because the critical workforce has been displaced by a non-functional mob.
That is exactly the bridge between cellular mechanism and clinical presentation that independent educational platforms strive to build. When a patient understands the concept of marrow crowding, their clinical symptoms cease to be arbitrary punishments and become logical consequences.
They can connect the dots.
Exactly. If a patient presents with profound, unyielding lethargy, pallor, and dyspnea, which is shortness of breath, they can now decipher why. The leukemic blasts have suppressed erythrocyte production.
The red blood cells.
Right. The patient is suffering from severe anemia. Their tissues are fundamentally starved of oxygen.
The logistical carriers are absent from the highways.
What if the patient experiences sudden, unexplained hematomas, bruises, or notices Panikia pinpoint hemorrhages on the skin, or suffers from persistent mucosal bleeding?
That correlates directly to the suppression of the thrombocytes, the platelets. The repair crew is missing, rendering the body incapable of patching the microscopic vascular breaches that occur naturally every single day.
That is clinical thrombocytopenia. And finally, if a patient presents with recurrent, severe opportunistic infections or persistent fevers.
The immunological defense infrastructure has collapsed. The functional white blood cells have been entirely replaced by an army of useless blasts that are completely incapable of recognizing or neutralizing a basic bacterial threat.
Exactly. What is genuinely fascinating here is how methodical this educational process is. By rigorously deciphering the foundational biology of what the disease actually is at the microscopic level, the patient acquires the necessary context to understand their diagnostic data.
It's all about context.
Yes, you simply cannot evaluate an intervention until you comprehend the specific nature of the cellular failure. And that complexity deepens significantly when we explore how leukemia is categorized.
Because it's not just one disease.
No, the brief indicates that leukemia is an umbrella term, and deciphering it requires navigating two major intersecting clinical axes.
Let's explore those axes because the terminology can look like an alphabet soup to a newly diagnosed patient. You've got AML, ALL, CML, CLL.
It is very confusing.
So the categorization typically involves two descriptive terms, one identifying the velocity of the disease progression and the other identifying the specific cellular lineage that sustained the initial mutation.
Right.
Let's begin with velocity, the distinction between acute and chronic.
This is a paramount clinical distinction. In acute leukemias, the malignant cells are entirely comprised of those highly immature, rapidly dividing blast cells we just discussed.
The ones that do nothing but multiply.
Exactly. Because they possess zero functional capacity and multiply at an exponential rate, the systemic deterioration is aggressive and swift. Without immediate, intensive intervention, acute leukemias are rapidly fatal.
It represents a sudden, catastrophic collapse of the hematopoietic system.
It is the factory being completely overtaken in a matter of days or weeks.
Terrifying. So what about chronic?
Conversely, chronic leukemias involve cells that are partially mature. They have progressed slightly further down the differentiation pathway before the mutation arrests their development.
So they grew up a little bit before getting stuck.
Yes. And because of that, these cells may actually retain a fraction of their normal function for a limited time. And critically, they proliferate at a much slower rate.
Oh, interesting.
A patient with a chronic leukemia may remain entirely asymptomatic for years, with the pathology often discovered incidentally during routine serological testing.
Like just getting a physical.
Exactly. The progression is insidious, and the corresponding therapeutic approach is often highly calibrated, sometimes even beginning with a watch-and-wait observational period rather than immediate intervention.
Wait, really? Just watching it?
Yes, active surveillance. Because intervening too early with toxic chemotherapies might do more harm than the slow-moving disease at that stage.
Wow. Okay, so we have the axis of velocity. Acute representing rapid accumulation of immature cells, and chronic representing a slower accumulation of partially mature cells.
Correct.
The second axis identifies the specific origin point within the marrow's production lines, the division between myeloid and lymphoid lineages.
Yes. To visualize this, consider the original stem cell as the trunk of a highly specialized developmental tree. Almost immediately, the trunk diverges into two distinct major branches. One is the myeloid progenitor line, and the other is the lymphoid progenitor line.
Let's trace the output of the myeloid branch first.
The myeloid lineage is responsible for generating the broader, more generalized cellular workforce. It produces the red blood cells, the platelets, and the specific white blood cells like neutrophils and macrophages that comprise the body's innate immune system.
The beat cops we mentioned.
Right. These are the immediate responders that indiscriminately attack foreign bodies. If the initial oncogenic mutation occurs anywhere along this specific developmental pathway, the resulting disease is classified as a myeloid leukemia.
And the alternative, the lymphoid branch.
The lymphoid lineage is extraordinarily specialized. It is dedicated exclusively to the production of lymphocytes, specifically T cells, B cells, and natural killer cells.
Which is the adaptive immune system.
Yes. This is the sophisticated intelligence network that memorizes specific pathogens and engineers customized antibodies to eradicate them. If the mutation originates in this highly specialized pathway, it is classified as a lymphoid, or lymphoblastic leukemia.
So by intersecting these two axes, a patient can decipher the specific nomenclature of their diagnosis. You arrive at the four primary pillars of the disease.
Right. Acute myeloid leukemia, AML, chronic myeloid leukemia, CML, acute lymphoblastic leukemia, AL, and chronic lymphocytic leukemia, CLL.
This is what it means to actually decipher a medical brief. It transforms an incomprehensible acronym into a clear map of both the speed of the threat and the exact location of the biological malfunction.
And arriving at those specific categorizations requires a highly sophisticated diagnostic workflow, which a comprehensive platform must also explain. A patient needs to understand why certain tests are being ordered.
It's a journey.
It is. It typically initiates with a complete blood count, or CBC, which measures the gross volumes of cells in the peripheral blood.
The blood in your veins.
Right. If the CBC reveals a stark anomaly, such as a massively elevated white blood cell count, coupled with severe anemia and thrombocytopenia, it triggers a cascade of more definitive diagnostics.
But a peripheral blood draw merely indicates a systemic imbalance. It does not definitively identify the microscopic nature of the cells themselves.
Exactly. The subsequent step often involves a peripheral blood smear, where a pathologist visually examines the cellular morphology under a microscope to detect the presence of circulating blasts.
Actually looking at the shape of the cells.
Yes. However, to truly map the cellular complexities and confirm the diagnosis, the diagnostic team must evaluate the manufacturing center directly.
They have to go to the factory.
They do. This necessitates a bone marrow aspiration and biopsy, extracting both the liquid marrow and a solid tissue core from the pelvic bone.
Which sounds incredibly daunting.
It is intimidating. But from there, the extracted cells are subjected to incredibly advanced assays. They use flow cytometry to analyze the specific proteins on the cellular surface. They use cytogenetics to peer directly into the nucleus to identify the exact chromosomal translocations and genetic mutations driving the aberrant behavior.
It is a staggering journey of discovery when you analyze it sequentially. We have moved from the terrifying abstract concept of cancer down through the systemic failure of the bloodstream into the physical marrow of the bone and finally into the specific genetic syntax of a single malfunctioning cell.
It's incredible science.
It really is. However, once a patient and their clinical team have successfully deciphered the precise nature of the condition, the paradigm shifts immediately to intervention. And this brings us to a critical junction in our deep dive today, examining how independent platforms utilize extensive databases to help patients navigate complex treatment questions.
This is where the theoretical understanding must translate into pragmatic application. Because diagnosing the cellular complexity is only the preliminary phase.
Right.
The subsequent phase is formulating a highly targeted therapeutic response. And it is here that the comprehensive drug databases and surrounding educational architectures provided by platforms like iMedix become indispensable utilities for the patient.
Let's focus our analysis on the actual utility of a medical database, because I suspect the general public harbors a significant misconception regarding what a drug database actually is.
How so?
Well, the assumption is often that it is merely a digital encyclopedia, a static, alphabetized ledger of pharmaceutical compounds and corresponding dosages.
Like a phone book.
Right. But if a platform is truly dedicated to patient education, how does a database transcend being a mere reference list and become an actual educational tool?
The foundational difference lies in the application of context and the sophistication of the translation layer. Raw pharmacological data in isolation is entirely opaque to the non-clinical user.
It's just numbers.
Right. If a platform simply provides a user with a data sheet detailing a compound's molecular weight, its pharmacokinetic half-life, its specific protein binding affinities, and its hepatic clearance rates, what actual value does that provide to a patient?
Absolutely none. It is essentially providing a manuscript written in a dead language. It might be factually accurate, but it is functionally useless without an interpreter.
The true value proposition of a platform like iMedix is the editorial architecture built around that raw clinical database.
Yeah.
The platform must actively translate complex pharmacological data into practical, comprehensible answers for real-world treatment questions.
So it has to connect the dots.
Yes, it cannot merely list what a compound is comprised of. It must illustrate the precise mechanical action of the drug and how it specifically targets the cellular complexities we just spent so much time deciphering.
Okay, so to use an example from our previous discussion, instead of a database merely indicating that a specific therapeutic agent is indicated for chronic myeloid leukemia, CML, a robust educational platform will detail the why. It will explain that in CML, a specific genetic mutation, I think it's called the Philadelphia chromosome, right?
Yes, exactly right.
That mutation produces an abnormal protein that functions as an irrepressible biological switch, instructing the cells to continuously divide. The database's translation layer will then explain that the specific prescribed medication, a tyrosine kinase inhibitor, is engineered to mechanically bind to that exact abnormal protein,
It physically blocks it.
effectively shutting off the switch and halting the production of the leukemic cells.
That is the exact mechanism of translation required. It explicitly connects the biological mechanism of the pathology to the pharmacological mechanism of the intervention in a manner the patient can vividly conceptualize.
I view a high-quality drug database as analogous to a highly specialized legal interpreter.
Okay, I like where this is going.
Imagine you are handed a dense, thousands of pages long foreign legal contract that dictates the future of your estate. You cannot decipher the syntax. You require an interpreter who does not simply provide a literal word-for-word translation because the underlying jurisprudence would still be incomprehensible.
Right. The literal translation doesn't give you the legal strategy.
Exactly. You require an expert who digests the document, understands the complex legal precedents, and then turns to you and explains, here is the structural risk to your assets, and here are the specific actionable clauses we are invoking to protect your interests.
That is brilliant. And if we project this capability forward, we must consider the impending evolution of these informational databases. We are currently transitioning into the era of precision oncology and highly personalized medicine.
It's moving so fast.
It is. Imagine the utility of a platform in the very near future that does not merely provide generalized pharmacological data. Consider a scenario where a patient could securely input the exact cytogenetic profile extracted from their specific bone marrow biopsy.
Their own personal cellular complexities.
Exactly. And the database algorithms could instantly cross-reference that unique genetic signature against global pharmaceutical registries and ongoing clinical trial data.
Oh, wow.
It could generate a hyper-personalized educational brief stating, based on your specific chromosomal anomaly, this particular therapeutic class demonstrates a statistically significant historical efficacy, while this alternative class is historically contraindicated for your specific mutation profile.
The potential for empowerment there is staggering, but I have to challenge this premise.
Please do.
So, what does this all mean for the everyday user right now? If we provide a patient with access to an incredibly powerful, translated, and perhaps eventually hyper-personalized medical database, are we inadvertently shifting the burden of diagnostic labor onto the patient?
That's a valid concern.
Because is the unstated goal for the user to become an amateur hematologist and dictate their own complex chemotherapeutic regimens? Or does this level of access serve a different fundamental purpose in the clinical dynamic?
That is a critical distinction to make. The objective of independent medical education is never to supplant the attending physician. The patient is not expected to absorb the equivalent of a decade of specialized clinical hematology.
That would be impossible.
The true objective is to elevate the caliber of the dialogue within the consultation room. The database equips the patient with a robust baseline understanding of the therapeutic landscape. It empowers them to transition from asking passive, generalized questions to asking highly targeted, intelligent queries.
Changing the conversation entirely.
Precisely. A patient can state, I have researched this proposed intervention, and I understand it carries a significant risk of inducing severe neutropenia.
Which is a drop in those specific white blood cells.
Right. So, given my already compromised white blood cell counts, what specific prophylactic protocols will we implement? And what are the precise clinical thresholds for hospitalization if I develop a fever?
Now, that represents a fundamentally different, infinitely more productive clinical conversation than simply asking, will this pill make me sick?
It puts the patient in the driver's seat.
which provides a seamless transition into what is undeniably the most complex and critical topic we must address in this analysis.
Medication safety.
Yes. We have examined how platforms help decipher the pathology, and we have discussed the translation of therapeutic interventions. However, granting patients unmitigated access to detailed pharmacological data, specifically regarding extensive safety profiles and adverse event registries, well, it introduces a profound psychological hurdle.
A huge one.
We need to critically analyze medication safety and the complex psychology behind how humans systematically misunderstand risk.
This is perhaps the most pervasive and consequential issue in modern healthcare communication. The provided sources highlight this explicitly. The general public consistently and profoundly misinterprets medical risk data.
We are just bad at it.
We really are. And this widespread cognitive failure is precisely why broad, contextualized medication safety discussions orchestrated by independent platforms like iMedix are so absolutely vital. Providing the data without the context is often more harmful than providing no data at all.
I want to dig into the root cause of this. Why is our species so inherently terrible at this specific cognitive task? We can engineer spacecraft and map the human genome, yet the human brain seems fundamentally incapable of rationally processing statistical medical risk. What is the psychological mechanism failing here?
The failure stems from evolutionary biology. The human cognitive architecture did not evolve to calculate abstract statistical probabilities. It evolved to recognize and react instantly to vivid, immediate existential threats.
Lions in the grass.
Exactly. When a patient evaluates medical risk, there's a massive cognitive dissonance between reading a terrifying adverse event on a pharmaceutical warning label and accurately conceptualizing the mathematical probability of that specific event occurring to them.
Let me make sure I understand the mechanics of that. If a patient reads a required disclosure stating a medication may cause internal hemorrhaging, acute hepatic failure, or sudden cardiac arrest.
Which are terrifying words.
Terrifying. Their brain does not pause to process the statistical likelihood. The brain immediately visualizes the catastrophic outcome. The emotional resonance of the horror completely bypasses the logical processing center.
Precisely. In the fields of behavioral economics and cognitive psychology, this phenomenon is often referred to as probability neglect.
Probability neglect.
Yes. When the potential outcome of a scenario is highly emotionally evocative or inherently terrifying, such as a fatal medical complication, the human brain tends to completely disregard the statistical probability of its occurrence.
It just sees the worst-case scenario.
To the patient's amygdala, a 1 in 10 chance and a 1 in 100,000 chance evoke the exact same visceral panic response. The cognitive focus is entirely consumed by the severity of the potential outcome, rendering the likelihood mathematically irrelevant in their mind. The mere presence of the warning creates a disproportionate anxiety that eclipses the proven, life-saving efficacy of the intervention.
I find it fascinating how selectively we apply this cognitive failure. We perform highly complex, inherent risk assessment calculations perfectly well in almost every other aspect of our daily lives.
We do it constantly.
Right. Consider the act of merging onto a high-speed interstate highway. We willingly accept the statistical risks of operating a vehicle at high velocities surrounded by thousands of other unpredictable drivers. Statistically, the risk of a severe or fatal vehicular accident is measurable and significant.
It's one of the most dangerous things we do.
Yet we execute this action daily without experiencing debilitating panic. We accept the risk because we intuitively grasp the context, we possess an illusion of direct control over the vehicle, and we place a high tangible value on the reward arriving at our destination.
Exactly.
But if that same individual sees a 0.5% risk with a severe complication on a medication insert, their internal risk assessment algorithm crashes, and they are inclined to reject the therapeutic protocol entirely. Why does the familiar risk of the highway compute, while the clinical risk of the pill induces paralysis?
It hinges on several factors: perceived familiarity, the illusion of control, and crucially, the stark, legally mandated format in which medical information is presented.
The black box warnings.
Right. Regulatory bodies obligate pharmaceutical manufacturers to exhaustively list every single adverse event reported during clinical trials, and often regardless of whether a definitive causal link to the compound was ever established.
So if someone got a headache during the trial, it has to be listed.
Yes, it is a vital mechanism for legal liability protection and long-term epidemiological tracking. However, when a patient encounters this raw data, it does not read like a statistical probability report. It reads like a guaranteed menu of impending misery.
Our prophecy.
And this introduces a profound systemic ethical dilemma. If we acknowledge that patients inherently misinterpret raw risk data due to cognitive biases, how many individuals are actively declining vital, potentially curative treatments based on mathematically irrational fear?
That is a staggering realization. A patient could be declining a highly efficacious targeted leukemia intervention because they are cognitively paralyzed by a potential side effect that statistically manifests in a fraction of a percent of the population.
It happens.
They are allowing a mathematical improbability to dictate a fatal outcome.
It is a pervasive clinical reality. Medication non-adherence driven by an irrational fear of adverse effects is a silent, massive public health crisis. And this is exactly where the structural responsibility of an independent medical information platform becomes evident.
And have to step in.
It is fundamentally insufficient and arguably negligent to merely publish a raw list of potential risks. A platform dedicated to true patient education has an obligation to aggressively contextualize those risks. They must explain the denominator of the equation, not just the terrifying numerator.
They have to build the perspective that the raw data lacks.
Yes, they must articulate that while a specific therapeutic risk absolutely exists and must be monitored, what is the baseline guaranteed risk of the underlying pathology if left entirely untreated?
Wow. Yeah.
If we connect this to the overarching theme of our deep dive, understanding medication safety is not simply an exercise in memorizing what could theoretically go wrong. It is an exercise in applied critical thinking.
Weighing the options.
It requires the patient to weigh the devastating guaranteed progression of the cellular complexities of a disease like acute leukemia, a pathology with an effectively 100% mortality rate if ignored, against the statistically calculated, actively managed risks of the clinical intervention.
It fundamentally shifts the patient's perspective. It helps them realize that choosing not to undergo treatment out of fear of a side effect is not a neutral action.
Not at all.
Doing nothing is an active choice, and that choice carries its own immense, often guaranteed statistical risk.
Precisely. Comprehensive education is the only viable antidote to probability neglect. When an independent platform meticulously explains the biological mechanism of a side effect, detailing precisely why it occurs, identifying the early clinical warning signs, and outlining the established protocols physicians use to actively mitigate it, it demystifies the risk.
It takes the power away from the fear.
It transforms a terrifying, seemingly random lightning strike of bad luck into a manageable, predictable variable within a structured clinical strategy.
It restores the patient's agency. It removes the sensation of playing a game of biological roulette with the prescription bottle and replaces it with the understanding that they are executing a calculated, strategically sound battle plan against a complex but decipherable enemy.
And that profound shift in perspective brings the entire thematic journey of our analysis today full circle. We initiated this deep dive by examining the chaotic, overwhelming, and often commercially compromised landscape of digital medical information.
The Wild West of the Internet.
Exactly. We analyzed the structural necessity of independent platforms acting as true fiduciaries of health data, unburdened by hidden incentives. We then transitioned to the microscopic level, exploring how specific medical briefs decipher the staggering cellular complexities of diseases like leukemia.
Moving from the abstract fear to the mechanical reality.
Right, moving the patient's understanding from a vague macro fear to a precise comprehension of marrow dysfunction and systemic failure. We evaluated how robust drug databases serve not as static ledgers, but as vital translators, converting dense pharmacological data into actionable answers for complex treatment inquiries.
The legal interpreters.
Yes. And finally, we dissected the evolutionary psychological barriers that cause humans to inherently misunderstand medical risk, highlighting how structured, contextualized education is the only mechanism to overcome that cognitive paralysis.
We have traversed an immense amount of conceptual territory today, and the ultimate takeaway I want you, the listener, to internalize from this exploration is the profound realization that advanced medical literacy is no longer the exclusive domain of clinicians and researchers.
It's for everyone.
It has become an essential, fundamental life skill in the modern era. Whether you find yourself confronting a highly complex systemic pathology like leukemia, or whether you are simply navigating the pharmacy aisle, evaluating the risk-benefit ratio of an over-the-counter analgesic, possessing the ability to accurately interpret statistical risks, to decipher the foundational biological mechanisms of your own body, and to formulate highly targeted clinical questions, That is what grants you authentic agency over your healthcare outcomes.
I couldn't agree more.
It removes you from the passive role of a patient and elevates you to an active, informed participant in your own survival.
Information, when it is rigorously vetted, accurately translated, and properly contextualized, represents the most potent therapeutic tool at our disposal. It actively dismantles the terror associated with medical uncertainty and replaces it with the profound power of genuine, informed consent.
Absolutely. And as we conclude this deep dive, I want to leave you with a lingering, somewhat provocative philosophical question.
Oh, I like these.
We have spent this entire session analyzing how current platforms and databases assist us in deciphering complex pathologies and properly contextualizing pharmaceutical risks. But as computational technology continues its exponential acceleration, as these medical databases expand into unimaginable scales, and as our capability to map our own individual cellular complexities deepens, perhaps eventually modeling our biological responses down to the atomic level, will there arrive a point where misunderstanding a medical risk is viewed as a quaint historical artifact of human cognitive limitation?
That's a fascinating thought.
Right.
Will advanced artificial intelligence and flawlessly executed personalized medicine render risk assessment entirely transparent and effortless for everyone? Or will possessing an infinite volume of perfectly accurate, hyper-personalized biological data ultimately overwhelm the human cognitive architecture in entirely novel ways?
Generating new, unforeseen categories of clinical anxiety.
Exactly. Misunderstandings that we cannot even currently conceptualize. Is there a point where perfect information becomes its own kind of overload? Something for you to think about?